How many people know who LLamasoft is, ever heard of us before or not? We're in Ann Arbor. We've been around for about 15 years now. So I remember about 2002, 2003, I met another guy who was a strange dude who had spent about a year and a half in a Starbucks writing some code to simulate supply chain operations. And it actually went back like 5 years prior. But along the way, I met this other dude, and we found something that was pretty interesting and pretty what we thought was unique. And I think that's one of the things that we want to talk about a lot today is how do you differentiate from everything else that's out there? Because there's a lot of stuff in the market that everybody's trying to sell to somebody, and you have to stand out. And so, with that, I want to get going on the journey of LLamasoft. And I came across this thing on the internet when you're just kind of browsing mindlessly. And this is a graphic that I found about a month ago. And I looked at it, and there we were in Michigan, in the United States of Startups, it's called, as the most well-funded companies by state, over the last 2 years, since 2015. I'm not sure I'm proud of that, and I want to talk a lot about why I'm not necessarily proud of that, because I think you can do a lot without having to rely on funding, but there's a certain point where it's necessary, and that's part of what is kind of a challenge that I've had in even events like this, is you've got a great idea, why are you immediately asking for money? I mean, and so that's something that we really want to look at, and I think that it's worth exploring a lot more, because the value that you have with your idea is so important that the longer you can make that thing work and the more that you can actually draw that out, the more value it is to you, all right, as opposed to that guy who gave you money. And so I think it's something that we have to talk about a lot. And along the way, our latest funding partner, there's I can see their portfolio companies all over here, and Uber and Domo and others that are their companies. So who are we? So we work in the supply chain domain. What we found was this one thing, which was that all of the money going into helping people make decisions about their supply chain. And if you think about what is the supply chain, right? First of all, you have suppliers, you have to make orders from, you have to rely on their lead times and all that stuff, and then eventually you get it to where you manufacture something. If you're not a manufacturer, you get it to your warehouses. Then from there, you have to figure out how much do you stock, how many warehouses do I need, where should they be, when should I reorder things, should I be reordering everything from one place versus all of my facilities, who are my customers, how do I service them, who should I partner with for transportation, what are my costs. There's all these moving parts all the way through the supply chain that basically eventually gets to the point where there's a product that somebody buys, right? And there's a price for that product. And you hope as a company that the price that they're paying for it is more than what it cost you to get it to them. And that's it. I mean, you have to figure out, how do I increase that gap of what are they buying and what am I spending for them to buy it, right? That's the whole game. And so when you think about the millions of combinations and possible ways in which you can structure your supply chain, right? It was fascinating to me that the vast majority of the money that people were spending was on how do you execute and how do you make your shipments and how do you make sure that every order that comes in is placed, and every time I have to replenish something, I know what decisions I need to make, and how do I plan my production and everything else. These are what are called execution systems, right? Planning and execution. So how do I run the supply chain and the operations that I have today? But to me, the bigger question was, well, what if that's the wrong supply chain altogether? What if you could do something completely different? What if you design something that's better? Because that's where the opportunity was. And nobody was focusing on that. They were focusing on, how do I run what I have a little bit better? And there's these incremental steps that you could take to make it slightly more efficient. I could squeeze an extra couple of cents out of my transportation provider. I could, get a little more efficient in how I plan my production planning processes. But if I were to say, you know what, get rid of these two production facilities altogether, consolidate them over here into something that's completely different, I'm going to spend $200 million, but over the course of 2 years, I'm going to save, $1 billion. I mean, those are the types of things that are out there. And so it's basically like design is allowing you to come up with that next idea, that innovation that's going to change things. And so that was the concept that we had, which was to say, look, hey, you have something out there, but you have all these ideas that you could try, things that might change the way you do your operations. And you have to, that's simulation technology, right? You have to simulate and say, all right, if I try this, what's going to happen? And there wasn't a supply chain simulation technology out there. And that was the platform that we came up with. That was the technology. That was our differentiating capability. Because there was all of these technologies that said, hey, you could run the supply chain that you have today, or you could just optimize some of the structure of where do I place my next facility given some assumptions that you have about how things might work in the future. But the idea that if I were to say, add these 3 new customers, and I were to come up with a new strategy that says, hey, I want to consolidate things here and I want to run something different, what is that going to mean for me? How is that going to impact my service? How is that going to change my costs? All of those types of things. That was what we had. And we realized that was different. That was something that was unique that was out there. And so as a result, we started, first of all, writing a white paper on this. But along the way, we published this white paper that said, hey, here's this 4-step methodology for transforming your supply chain. And we added a step of simulation in there. Of you first of all have to visualize what you have today. You have to create a digital model of what you have. And then you can basically optimize what that structure is. And then you can simulate it to test out all these other ideas. And then eventually you can design for robustness and risk management and all these other things that are core to your business. But we added this step that was something that only we did, that nobody else did. And we published that. And we put it out there. And eventually we put a website out there. And this is, over the course of a couple of months. And one day, the website had my cell phone on it as the corporate contact, and it had an address that was somewhat farcical in Ann Arbor. And Unilever called us from the UK and said, look, we just signed this new service level agreement with Walmart, and we promised them 99% plus service of all of our products over the next 5 years. We have no idea if we can even achieve it. We have no idea if we can do it, and we have no idea what that, if we did achieve that, what it's going to do to all of our other customers. And this is Unilever. This is a 50 billion plus corporate, giant out there. And we said, okay, we can help you with that. And so they flew over from the UK, and in the time it took for them to book their trip to come into the Ann Arbor, we basically came up with a logo for LLamasoft, and then that address wasn't completely farcical. There was something there. It was above the Del Rio bar in Ann Arbor, and we confiscated that space for the day that they came, and we put logos and stickers up on the walls, and then we hired people, friends and family, to come in and sit at desks and pretend that they worked for us, while we spent the entire day explaining our technology to them. And at the end of it, they left and they said thank you, and they said we're visiting 3 other companies that we think might be able to help us. And we went back to doing our jobs. And it was about 3 days later that we got a phone call. It was the +44 area code. I knew it was a UK call, and they were sitting in LaGuardia getting ready to fly back, and they said, we looked at everything, you guys are it. This is it, this is what we need. We have a list that we created in the last 3 days of the 9 things that you guys don't do that we absolutely need before we can buy your software. So let's talk about that. And And basically what ended up happening was became actually the entire strategy for our next decade of doing business, which was we find things that are different, that are unique, that our customers need, and then we create contracts that are really flexible in ways that we say, look, yeah, we can do that. And here's what it's going to take, here's what it's going to cost, here's what we need to invest in with you, and you know what, you don't have to pay us anything until you get that. And then we went about solving that problem. And it took us 9 months to build in those additional features and functions. And every 2 weeks, we would send them updates along the way as where we are. Eventually, we got to the point where we sent them the software. They started trying it. They started trying out these things. And you know, at some point, it was about 7 months into the 9, they said, okay, we're sold. You got it. We're ready to buy some software. And they wrote us a check. They bought the first 2 licenses of our product that we call Supply Chain Guru. And basically that first $200,000 order that we took got us to hire our first 2 developers full time. And that was, and it also gave us a little extra money to go to a conference where we could present what we're doing. And at that conference, we met some people from Dell. We met some people from ConocoPhillips, and we met a couple other companies that were really interested in this whole thing. Those purchase orders got us to hire a couple more developers, and it kind of went from there. It was bootstrap. And when I talk about this whole funding thing, I'm really being completely serious that, you know, the longer that you can hold out and the longer that you can make this thing work on your own, without any additional funding, without any help from anybody else, the more that you can get somebody like a Unilever and a ConocoPhillips and a Dell on your logo page that you put up there, the better off you are. The more value you have as a company, the more reference points you have along the way. And it's unbelievable when you can walk into somebody as a 3, 4, 5 person company, but you can point to these people who have essentially bet their business on you, what that means. And so, you know, part of this whole thing is about the credibility that you build. So I put this up here. There's a bunch of stats on here, but you know, today, basically, we're still headquartered in Ann Arbor. We have over 500 employees. By the end of the year, we'll be at 6. So along the way, let's just hit a couple other things. I wanted to highlight, you know, I mean, the main thing I think for us is when you look at the customers across different industries. I mentioned right up front with Unilever, with our first customer, you know, we partnered with them. We found something that was different, that nobody else had, and they were willing to invest in us because we had that one thing. There was 9 other things that they needed that were absolutely critical that other people could do, that we couldn't do, but we had that one thing that nobody else could do, and that's so critical in all of this, in that they were willing to pay good money to pay for that one thing and actually fund all this other stuff to help us get up to functional equivalence with other things that were on the market. And I think that when you start to look at that, there's a lot of companies out there that are willing to do that, right? There's that one thing, and if you can provide, what is the ROI? What is that benefit that you get for this one thing that's different than anybody else, right? People will ignore a lot of, you know, ugliness. They will ignore a lot of things that are subpar to get that one thing. And they will help you get those other things on track, right? And I think that it's really fascinating because it's a true partnership. And you have to look at it as a partnership. So if you look at, you know, and this is my last slide, what are those kind of 4 keys that I would say that you have to focus on if you're going to do this and if you're going to be successful? And if you're truly going to do something different. And it starts with the differentiation, right? You have to have that thing. If you can't answer the simple question of what do I do different than everybody else in the market, then just go do something else. I mean, go back to your other job because, you know, you're going to waste a lot of time, you're going to waste a lot of effort, you're going to waste a lot of money. And eventually, you're not going to succeed. You have to have something that is truly unique and truly different, right? Especially when there's other things already in the market. I mean, if you're going out there and you're trying to sell something to someone, and you don't have that one thing, it's really a lot of wasted effort. So, I can't emphasize that enough. And it leads right into sales strategy, because you don't do a full frontal sales strategy of trying to compete on every feature and every function, right, with those guys that are established competitors and established people in the market. You flank and you find these other things and these other people and these other companies that are looking for that one thing. And you have to spend a lot of time segmenting your customer base, and you have to spend a lot of time realizing that, it's not enough to just do a lot of effort to try to sell to everybody. You have to figure out very clearly who is that person, that exact person that is going to be the person that you need to be targeting. And it saves you a whole lot of time and a whole lot of effort, and it actually gets you to the point that you need to be at in order to make sure that you're successful, right? And so that's another unbelievably important thing, because if you spend all this time, on people that will never buy what you're selling, you're basically you're going to fail, right? You have to find those people. You only have so many hours in the day, and you can't pay an entire sales organization on day one. So you have to make sure that every effort and every hour and every minute that you spend on things is focused on those people that are willing to listen. Okay. The third thing I think that's really important is that once you actually do make a sale, that you do everything to make sure that they are unbelievably successful, like overwhelmingly successful, and they love you, and they will say great things about you, and they will go above and beyond to make sure that you don't fail, right? So that means that customer satisfaction, and if you think about it, I mean, you could have 100 customers, and that one customer that you failed could completely taint the entire pool. I mean, it's so much. There's a lot that's said about this, and there's a lot that's studied about this, but that one negative review, it taints everything else that's out there. So be very strategic about which customers you choose to do business with, and then when you do get those customers, you just don't let them fail. You don't let them fail, and actually you over-deliver. You do everything in your power to spend extra time and extra effort with them. If you do that, those guys are going to be gold. I can tell you those 5-6 people that took hundreds of reference calls for us when they didn't need to, and they're still around and they're still doing it. And today we can kind of break bread and look back at those olden days fondly. And then the last thing is really important, and this is where it gets into the strategy of managing growth as to when is the right time, or when is it absolutely necessary that you can't do it yourself, that you need external partners, that you need other people to come in. When is the right time? Is it 20 people? Yes, that's about the time, 20, 25 people in the organization, where you don't now manage everybody. Now you have another level that starts to get in there, and then you get another level. There's actually, at what point do you delegate and you have managers that manage people, right? And then you have those managers that manage other people, right? There's these 20, 50, 100 person plateaus that you get to that are so unbelievably important that if you skip that step, again, you're not going to scale. At some point, you are going to fail, because even if the orders do come in and you start to take all of this, if you don't have a way to delegate and you don't have a way to manage and you don't have a way to scale, you're in trouble. And so I think along the way, this is the point where some external advice, some external funding, some external resources come in handy, right? And those are the times that I think are the most important. And so, what I say is, there are certain situations and there are certain IP and there are certain ideas that are so interesting and so important, but need funding immediately and early in order to get them off the ground. You need to do that, right? If it's that differentiating, if it's that important, if you do this and there's nothing else out there, otherwise, postpone it. Postpone it as long as you can until you can get there, right? And along the way, we'll give you some, ideas and some advice on what to avoid. So,
perfect.
thanks.
Well, first, a big round of applause for Toby from LLamasoft.